This is a Hope 1032 podcast.
Hello, welcome to Undistracted. I'm your host, Laura Bennett, and this is the podcast where we learn from our guests how to be better at building our lives with intention around our passions, our purpose, and dealing with some of the stuff that can get in the way of it. You can rate, review this podcast, subscribe wherever you're listening, and find video versions of many of these interviews on the Hope 1032 YouTube channel. Let me ask you a question. How do you feel about getting older, aging? Are you excited, grateful to be here? Nervous, maybe you're unsure, you're just seeing what comes your way and rolling with it. Our relationship to aging can be complex, it's varied, it can be so influenced by not only our own feeling, but the voices of culture, society, our family, our gender. There is a lot that plays in to the realities of aging. Our guests today are Melissa Doyle and Naima Brown, the authors of How to Age Against the Machine, an empowering guide for women aging on their own terms. Melissa Doyle is one of the best known and trusted voices in Australian media, with more than 30 years of journalistic experience, including 14 as the host of Channel 7's Sunrise. Naima is an experienced TV producer, journalist and writer who has worked for SBS and NBC News, New York, in addition to Channel 7. The pair met while they were working together on Channel 7's flagship program, Sunday Night. This conversation is genuinely one of my favourites that I've had on the podcast because these women speak with such authenticity and clarity about some of the questions and the challenges that they've had as they gradually, year on year, start to get that little bit older. So let's welcome Naima and Melissa to the show.
Hi, Laura.
Thank you.
This is a really important conversation I think you guys are bringing to the table. When did the conversation around aging and having to discuss it become a conversation for both of you that you wanted to have together?
Oh gosh, we started having this conversation together with many glasses of wine in the lead up to my 50th, because I found that everybody was asking me how I felt about turning 50. Naima's a few years younger than me, and I kept saying to her, why is everyone so focused on this age? And suddenly you recognize that there are these milestones that come along in your life. So as two girlfriends do, we would sit down with a glass of wine and solve all the problems of the world. And then we realized that they were probably questions that we weren't the only ones asking about aging and all of the things and the complexities, the joys, the good bits, the bad bits that come with it. So give two journalists a challenge. We sat down and we did an audio documentary for Audible. And then on the back of it, the book is a far deeper dive into it all. So it was really nice, wasn't it? It was kind of us deciding that we had lots of questions and knowing that we probably weren't the only ones.
Yeah, it was the proverbial thread that you tug on and then suddenly the whole jumper unravels, right? And we realized, that the questions that we began with, as Mel said, just as two women discussing these things together, only led to more questions, only led to a bigger sense of what an important topic this is. And, with the caveat that there is a growing world of conversation around this topic that we're really excited to launch our book into, we certainly didn't feel like we could get it in kind of a one-stop shop, which was our intention with the book.
Yeah, what were some of the questions you both felt needed answering? I mean, maybe, Mel, the fact that at a milestone birthday like 50, and I think it happens at 40, 30, any kind of milestone, you're kind of expected to have an opinion about age. Is that one of the things that maybe needed sort of resolution in your mind?
Yeah, I think too, aging has many negative connotations for people. And there is a perception of, that your looks are different, your body is different, you change the way you go about your place in the world. And we felt first and foremost that was the wrong messaging. We shouldn't be looking at aging as a negative because it's a positive. Every day you're on this world is a bonus. You're aging from the day you're born. And we just had that challenging conversation of why are there perceptions placed upon older people that maybe they're not as quick and clever in the workplace, or maybe they can't do certain things, or maybe they can't bring certain things to the table. And then there's also the perception that we have on ourselves that maybe I am getting older, maybe I am different. And Naima and I kept coming back to that premise of, yes, you're different, but different isn't a bad thing. Different isn't necessarily negative. I think of the wisdom that I've gained in my, 30 plus years as a journalist. I'd like to think that I'm a better journalist now than I was 20 years ago. And I think we need to recognize and respect the wisdom and the learnings that come with getting older. And maybe in our society, we just haven't enough.
Yeah, is it an Australian thing, this attitude toward aging that sees it as a decline, or is that a more universal phenomenon?
Look, it's universal in some countries. Others treat aging with the respect that we think it deserves. We spoke to the most amazing Queen Mother in Ghana, who is at a point where her role in the community is acknowledged because she has this incredibly powerful position where she is able to educate the younger generation and guide them through. And, we looked at societies where that is revered, where older people, you look at politics in America, for example, but particularly older women are seen as holders of wisdom. And so, Nye and I have often talked about the meme that we love where, I might, what is it? Something like, I forget the exact words, but, I might need my kids to help me work the printer, but I taught them to use a knife and fork. So it's all about working together and recognizing the value that our younger generation brings, but also that our older generation brings.
And I think
there's a question.
Go ahead.
No, sorry. There's a question that your question sparked in our work, in our writing, in our exploration, which was, what is the difference between becoming an elder or becoming elderly?
Yeah.
And it's a question that we answer differently, I think, every time we sit to ponder it together. It's a shifting, very live question, but one of the constants, as Mel alluded to, is that, there are communities and cultures and countries where there are things that you must age into. The Queen Mother in Ghana that Mel referenced couldn't have taken on that role at 25. It was something she had to gain the maturity and the wisdom and the experience to actually step into that role. Whereas, becoming elderly is when the emphasis is on the things that you age out of, the things that you are, kind of withdrawn from. And so we really wanted to hone in on those particularities.
I'm glad you brought that up because I really wanted to touch on that part of this conversation that I think points to people's feeling sometimes that with age comes a sense of irrelevance or exclusion, that maybe you're not going to be honoured and respected, but you're kind of just going to be made invisible. There's an underlying fear in that. How do you guys address the way to overcome the fear of aging, not just the practical realities, but the kind of scary side of getting older that some people feel?
We felt that it went both ways because it's all, yes, of course, there's a lot of people that feel that, but then you don't want to let that happen. It's also, I think, the onus on us as we get older to stay informed. We have we've interviewed a life coach in there that says, if your circumstances have changed, so say, for example, a generalization, but a woman may spend her 20s like I did in, working on her career. Then she raises children and keeps working. And for many women, their purpose in life is defined by a lot of those exterior factors, whether it be raising a family, whether it be, a career. And sometimes she may get to a point where that then changes. How do we treat ourselves as a project and move forward and say, what do I still have to offer? What makes me still relevant and visible? And what is my purpose in life going forward? And we come back to the term purpose and meaning a lot because sometimes that has to be renegotiated. It maybe goes in a different direction, but we need it. Everyone needs a reason to get out of bed every day. And so sometimes you actually have to work at finding what that is. And as you get older, it just might be different than it was when you were younger, but it's no less value. So yeah, we don't want to fear aging. We shouldn't fear aging. We should embrace all the wonderful qualities that come with it. We want this book to be a celebration of aging just as much as a checklist and a Q&A and answers to all those burning questions that you have. Celebrate it. Let's own it. I think it's remarkable. I don't think we shout that from the rooftops nearly enough.
It certainly is a celebration. You both have done that so well. So definite kudos for doing that. And of course, in the title, you're wanting to age against the machine. So how would you define what the machine's view of aging is?
I mean, in some ways, it goes to the question that you just asked, in terms of what about the things that we are concerned about? What about that fear that comes up within us? There's a moment in the book where we say, you're not crazy, ageism is real. So, yes, we need to continue to renegotiate our purpose, which is a beautiful way to phrase it, as Mel said. But at the same time, there are barriers. And in some ways, nobody's coming to save us. No one's coming to do this work for us. We kind of have to band together and do this ourselves. So the machine for us, and this is something that kind of continuously came into focus in new ways, but the machine for us is anyone, anything, any institution, any brand, right, that's telling you how you're doing it is wrong, and that you must do it this way, and aging must look like this. And so anytime you just feel that, coming up against that conflict, up against that wall of going, but this isn't me, this isn't the pathway that I want to take, I have so much more to offer still, my relevance is only getting stronger. That's the machine. And that's where, Mel and I often talk about, I'm certainly not immune to those moments where you look in the mirror and the external reality doesn't face the internal reality, where, this or that might want to get plucked or dyed or altered or interfered with. And by all means, no judgment from us. Again, anyone who's judging you, that's the machine. But we really want to shift our focus. If we can shift that rage about new crinkles and new gray hairs into the wage gap, into the lack of superannuation that women retire, into these the bigger, what we'd like to call the age cage, then that's when I think we can really affect some real change.
There's an injustice as well as a kind of cultural conversation that I feel like you guys are doing a great job at pushing back on. And Mel, for you, I feel like there's a tension that you probably have sat between where working in media, particularly being the face of Sunrise for so many years, you're kind of part of that quote unquote machine to a degree, right? You're in an industry that can make people feel like aging isn't something that they want. But then also within that, you're experiencing the pressure to not age as a face on television. Has that been something that you've wrestled with?
To be really honest, no. My face is aged. I smile. I have big crinkles. I'm proud of it. It means I've spent, all my life smiling and not frowning. This is how I look. Okay, of course, I choose to go to the hairdresser and have my greys dyed. I'm not ready to go grey, but I respect women that have. I still want to rock a great pair of heels. I still put attention into what I wear, how I present. But I also think that's self-respect. That's just who I have been and who I was raised, and that has never, ever changed. I think the media, I hate it where we always blame the media for all the ills of the world, because if anything, we're storytellers. And I'm a journalist. This is my chance to tell a story that matters. Naima and I felt that this was something we really wanted to put into the public domain to raise, that's to trigger conversations like we're having today. So using our voice, using my profile to have these issues tackled and talk about them everywhere and anywhere is what I see as my job in the media. So, may we continue telling those stories and celebrating people that need to be celebrated.
And I like that I so respect that you guys have taken that approach, because when you read the book, one thing that I noticed was this isn't like a beauty and fashion handbook for getting older. This is about the big stuff of life. How do you process grief and deal with the reality of mortality? How do you talk about some of those big things like the wage gap and all of that? It's not a superficial picture of staying young. It's actually about the evolution of life as we get older and changes in identity as well.
Yeah, we felt, and they were often conversations that we don't have until you're faced with them. Suddenly retirement is looming over the hill, and it's not something that research has shown us that people plan for quite as much as they might plan for when they're going to start a family, or when they're going to buy a house, or what their next position might be on the career ladder. That retirement's one of those things that creeps up. For many women, the decision is not theirs, and that's what makes us quite angry. But for those that do have the power over the timing of it, it isn't something that you go through the checklist. Grief and end of life planning. I mean, I don't know about you, but I don't want to talk about it because it's sad. it's one of those things, it's a reminder that we're not going to be here forever, but we need to talk about them. And a lot of these topics that we wrote about, we were living. Naima, gosh, had me on the phone in tears so many days as we were writing the relationships chapter, because my oldest son, left home at the time, and I wrote about empty nesters. And you know, that was something I hadn't thought about. I spent 20 years getting him ready to fly the nest, and then I totally forgot to get myself ready. So we just felt that there was a lot of areas that we don't actually think about far enough in advance, that, you know, we forget that older women start out as younger women, and we've got to tackle these things a little earlier.
Yeah, we've got to use a preparation window. And I know that that's one of the difficulties in, I think, getting older, in the way that the order of learning, right? So when you reach your 40s, 50s, 60s and beyond, there's a beautiful freedom and wisdom that can come with that. But then I think there's younger women who wish they could get those epiphanies sooner. Is there a way we can arrive, I suppose, at some of these points of realization without necessarily having to wait until we're so much older?
Yes. I mean, as Mel just said, you know, another kind of key idea that really anchored us in our writing and in creating this book was that older women start out as young girls. And if I could throw out, you know, one more saying into the conversation that I'm loving seeing much more frequently, is that you're not too old and it's not too late, right? So yes, we would like to see this book in the hands of, you know, your 22-year-old who's maybe stepping into her first, you know, real job, and she's going to think long and hard about her savings plan, about, as Mel said, put as much thought into preparing for her, you know, later decades as she might into when does she perhaps, if she wants to, have children or marry, or, you know, those bigger milestones that happen earlier in our life. And so we do really, as you know, there's a beautiful little sticker on the book that says it's the book that every woman over 40 needs, but we wouldn't mind seeing that number, you know, slide down a little bit. And I really do think it's important to say, though, to anyone listening, that it really isn't too late. You know, so many women find themselves in their 50s, post a life where they were doing all of the things that they'd been told they should be, unpaid labor, you know, the primary carers in their homes, for their children, or perhaps even for their elders. That leaves them with a real financial struggle sometimes. It doesn't take much, maybe one big health emergency. And then, you know, as one of the women we interviewed for the book did, you may find yourself experiencing homelessness.
Yeah.
And the woman that we did talk to, Sam, who did spend a period of time living in her car as a woman in her 50s, she has bounced back and she is doing so much better now. And I think that part of her story is really important to emphasize. As soon as you start to demystify these things and have those conversations with each other, I do think that there's a way to find ourselves back to dignity, to stability in our older years.
And Laura, for any of younger listeners on this, think of it as power. You have the power over your future at any moment, at the earliest possible opportunity. You know, whether or not a woman has a safe, stable, supported older life is directly related to whether she had a safe, stable, supported younger life. And so, as Nai said, there are actions that we can take. It's never too early. And I think it's just, we found so many of these things we've talked about in the book, we just hadn't thought of until suddenly they were there. So I'd love it if something that comes out of all of this is we do a little bit more pre-planning. We do a little bit more thought into the logistics of getting older. Where am I going to live? What am I going to do? What am I going to need around me? Who am I going to need around me? What can I do to care for my parents? You know, what position are they in? Just some of those questions maybe think of a little earlier than we may have traditionally.
Yeah, and I'm grateful that there's a book like this that's going to be empowering people to have those conversations, because I know for those that are at the younger end of the spectrum, one of the things that's so important is having examples of women in midlife and beyond living well, living with that sort of power mindset, living in a way that says what's down the line can be better. You can get stronger as you get older, that it doesn't have to go downhill, because it can be so scary to think all that's in front of us is this inevitable kind of swamp of uncertainty and vulnerability, right?
Absolutely. I think that, you know, again, it's you know, sunlight is the best disinfectant, right? And there's a reason why, as you mentioned earlier, we include a chapter on grief. there are inevitable moments of grieving that come with aging. And it's not just the grief of losing loved ones, it's the grief of, maybe coming to terms that we can't drive anymore. Maybe it's coming to terms that, our eyesight isn't what it used to be. There are moments of loss, moments of recalibrating along that timeline. But as we always come back to, the alternative is to not be here anymore, right? So it's about strengthening that muscle so that when we come up against those moments, which we will, certainly we don't want to portray aging as this kind of, running through the fields with rainbows and puppy dogs, although, maybe that can happen some days. But it's about going, okay, so when I do come up against a moment where, it's the hard stuff of living a long life, I have some tools in my toolbox. And we hope this book is one of them. I mean, I'm negotiating some of, these things in terms of what's happening with my parents as they age as we speak. And the amount of times that I've personally reached for my very dog-eared and post-it noted copy of our book to refer back to the wisdom of the experts that we've interviewed is countless. So that's what we hope that it can be an offering of.
And there's a conversation about self-confidence in this all as well, which I think you guys do a great job of looking at through the lens of friendship, through the lens of intimacy, work, everything. When it comes to our self-confidence, what would your words of wisdom be? Either of you can jump in on this, on how to retain confidence as we get older, because it can be knocked around so much.
And maybe it needs to be renegotiated. I feel like all of us through our entire life, there's peaks and troughs, isn't there? There's moments where I don't know about you, but I'm, fist pumping the air going, yay, I've got this. And other moments when you doubt yourself or your relevancy or your level of knowledge or your ability to contribute. I think that's a normal thing. So let's acknowledge it. Let's talk about it. Let's normalize it. And maybe there comes a time as one gets a little bit older to redefine it. But I think that's where the support networks we have around us are so important. We talk a lot about relationships and friendships in this, and sometimes friendships are different than they were when they were younger. Hopefully you're still lucky to have the people in your life that you've had throughout. Sometimes someone might move or circumstances change or you lose those people, but never recognize how much we all need one another. I come back to the fact that as a pair of journalists, we believe in storytelling. We believe in sharing so much. And I think women are really good at that. I don't know about you, but I feel like I can sit down at a dinner party, meet someone for the first time, and by the time dessert comes around, I know everything about them. Whereas my husband kind of is like, what were their names again? And I can give you their family history. But that is so important. And that is how we need to stay connected to one another, and then use that to remind each other of our values and what we still have to give. There's so many times I ring Naima, I'm feeling wobbly and can I do this? Am I okay? Should I be doing this? And vice versa. She's the first one to be my cheerleader. And I think we all need those people in our lives.
Absolutely. And I think too, there's what's the word? Like an evolution of how we see ourselves from a feminine point of view. For some women, that connection to femininity, it really matters, but it changes as you get older. You guys are very practical in talking about the physical changes that our bodies experience, moving through premenopause, menopause, and everything afterwards. What do you think that changing idea of who we are as women does to our sense of ourselves as we age and as our bodies change?
I think, one thing we're always really mindful to come back to is that there is no one size fits all approach. We spoke to, an older auntie in South Korea who, which is one of the plastic surgery capitals of the world, where her approach to aging would be very much in that category of anti-aging, right? So every possible intervention, every possible surgery that she could afford, she would avail herself to, all the way to the other end of the spectrum. We spoke to a lovely elder, Deirdre in New Zealand, who is a Maori leader in her community, and she wears the traditional moko on her face, and she couldn't fathom getting involved in the natural progression of what her face and the story that her face is telling, right? So those two ends of the spectrum. And I think the middle path that Mel and I discovered, which we borrow from a really incredible psychologist that we interviewed, Dr. Julie Malone, is that it's all about getting really quiet within yourself for a moment and asking yourself what your expectations really are, and are they realistic? So, before you take any measures, whether it's spending a little bit more money than you might have on some fancy cream, all the way to the other end of the intervention spectrum, what are you actually expecting this thing to do? And if you're expecting it to have a really big impact on your emotional well-being, Dr. Julie Malone taught us that you might find yourself disappointed. So, getting, I think, connected to your intention around all of the external aesthetic things is like Mel said, for her, for myself as well, those things come down to a sort of self-respect, to an enjoyment of, of fashion and of beauty and of this landscape. But, there has to be more purpose and meaning, as we always say, to come alongside that if we're not going to end up disappointed.
I think for many women it's different. I think it probably also depends on how much you valued it when you were younger. We speak to supermodel Paulina Poroskova, whose image has been very much a part of who she is and what she's done and her job, basically. So for some women, the word invisibility, they look at it as a negative because they now walk into a room and no one looks at them, and they don't like that. For other women, they found it empowering. They said they can walk into a meeting now in a workplace and men look them in the eye rather than anywhere else. And they found that quite a strengthening moment. So I think it's about how you felt about it before and how you move forward with what you probably choose to focus on. But, look, we've been really, it's all about no judgment. That's the thing that upsets us the most when you see commentary around how people choose to age or what they choose or choose not to do to themselves aesthetically. It's no one else's business. I think And also women deserve the right to change their mind. It might be something that you never want to do or embark on, but then there could be an illness, there could be surgery, there could be a breakup, there could be a million reasons where suddenly you wake up one day and you feel quite different about how you felt about it before. And that might mean that you now want to do something, or you no longer do or want to do anything. So I think it's about the power to choose and respecting other women for the choices that they make and supporting them. You know, as I said, there's no right way to age. There's no right way to deal with some of the things that will keep one person awake at night. Are probably entirely different to what will keep another woman awake at night.
Yeah. And Mel, you point out a really great distinction, I think, between being of an anti-aging mindset versus approaching all of these decisions you make around whether it's physical appearance and anything else around health. How did you arrive at that decision of looking at health as opposed to anti-aging?
First of all, we really hate the term anti-aging because you can't anti-age. Like, what is anti-aging? It's going against the natural course of life. And as you know, we keep coming back to, aging is to be celebrated. Aging is another day, another week, another month on this earth. A 4-year-old is older than a 3-year-old. So we like the concept of positive aging, focusing on what you have and what you haven't and what you don't. Hang on, what am I saying? Focusing on what you have and what you no longer have. And I think that's to do with anything, not just aging. It's like when their circumstances change. I think it's the way you look at things. It's that glass half full versus glass half empty. Yeah, I wake up in the morning and I don't spring out of bed anymore. I have to sit there for a moment because my knees are a little bit creaky. But big deal, I can still get up and walk to the bathroom to clean my teeth. And I still have teeth to clean. You know, I think it's about how you look at the world. And I'd like to think that I've always been that glass half full person. But even more so as I get older, I still have my family around me. I'm so lucky. I still have my parents. I still have my friends. I look around and I am so rich with all of those things. And that's one of the other things that Naima and I came back to writing this is we are very privileged. We are both educated white women in one of the richest countries on this earth. We're both able-bodied. We're in stable relationships. We can pay the bills. We're so lucky. And that's what makes us even more determined to use this platform that we have to advocate on behalf of women living in countries around the world where their value was tied to having babies or working in a field. And once those elements have gone, their value has decreased, if not vanished. How do we as women in these privileged positions fight on their behalf? They're the women I worry about. You know, that's going to cause me more wrinkles and anguish than, you know, just getting older. And I think, as I said earlier, save our rage for those things that matter. You know, there are so many women around the world that are just not aging. They don't have a choice over their health. They don't have a choice over their circumstances when they can retire. They probably don't even have a choice whether they're allowed to have a job or not, or they can hold on to it. So, you know, that's the stuff that really I think is important.
It's such a gift that you guys are having this conversation. Yes, absolutely fist pump for that. Our time, though, is coming to an end. Nai, is there any final thoughts you want to bring to the table around the gift and, yes, the conversation that this book is going to be having with the many women, and I hope some guys too, that read it?
Oh, look, I would just say read the book and then spark those hard conversations. Just be the one to start them. You know, whether it's with your own parents, whether it's with your girlfriends, your sister, your daughter, you know, just be the one to take that big deep breath and jump in, because chances are that other person does want to talk about these things. And there's a big process of destigmatization, demystification, some big words, but it's big work. So I would just say get to it.
Guys, thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate you both being on the podcast.
Thanks, Laura.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Undistracted. This conversation around aging is an ongoing one, because whatever your birthday is right now, you've got others ahead of you, and with them may come some more complex conversations about what it means to grow up and to grow old. Melissa and Naima's book is called How to Age Against the Machine. It is a beautiful read and a really inspiring one in so many ways. So I hope you check that out. Share this episode with someone you know this conversation is going to help. And find this podcast also on the Hope 1032 YouTube channel. Subscribe to it wherever you're listening. And until next time, enjoy living this undistracted life.
This is a Hope 1032 production. Thanks for listening.